So you think Heavy D is just rolling easy, cashing in on his monster trucks and living the dream? Think again. Behind the smoke and thunder of roaring engines lies a storm of chaos. Lately, it seems like he's been balancing more disasters than a circus clown with knives. Every move feels like a gamble, each project a question mark hanging in the air. Is he really a mastermind running an empire of steel and fire, or just a daredevil praying the whole thing doesn't collapse under its own weight? Take Alan, for example. On paper, it sounds epic, a mountain stronghold rising from the wilderness. But the reality? A nightmare of mud, busted equipment, and impossible logistics. No roads. No heavy-duty haulers. Just a stubborn dreamer stuck with a beat-up four-wheeler clawing its way up a trail of doom. And there's Heavy D, watching his buddies sink into failure, deciding to play savior. His solution: drag a 40-foot shipping container up into the mountains, stuffed to the brim with Alan's treasures, scrap metal, random junk, and one beast of a steel table. It was like Christmas morning wrapped in diesel fumes. The Kodiak 5500 giveaway truck became the warhorse for this mission. Outfitted with giant Goodyear G275s, it carried a staggering 30,000-plus pounds up dirt inclines that looked more like cliffs. Heavy D himself admitted he nearly kept the truck for his own arsenal. But when they finally arrived at Alan's so-called fortress, the scene turned from triumph into a tragic comedy. The forklift was a rolling coffin, his loader looked ready to explode, and the army trucks he'd been banking on? Nothing but wreckage, flipped, smashed, or rotting in place. The dream was crumbling before their eyes. And yet, instead of facing reality, Alan doubled down. The grand plan? Buy even more junk. A graveyard of old Dodge Ram military trucks, rusting away for pennies, hauled back one by one with the rescue rig's winches straining, tires sinking into mud, and tempers boiling. Every pull was a fight against nature itself. At one point, Ron nearly got catapulted straight out of a truck, hanging on for dear life as it lurched and bucked like a wild animal. It wasn't just risky, it was insane. What began as a bold vision spiraled into something darker, less a grand adventure, more a disaster documentary where loyalty blurred into lunacy. Heavy D and his crew marched forward not with strategy but with stubbornness, each mile clawed out of sweat, mud, and the unholy roar of machines that threatened to collapse under their own rusted weight. The air itself seemed heavy with doubt, every breath carrying the same unspoken question. Was this empire of diesel and dreams truly indestructible, or was it already crumbling, one shattered engine, one broken promise at a time? The moss-cloaked hulks they dragged out of the graveyard didn't look like hope, they looked like corpses begging to be buried. To Alan, those 5 battered trucks were lifelines, veins still pulsing with the faint beat of his dream. But to Heavy D, they were ghosts dressed as warriors, hoop ties that rattled louder than they roared. Yet still, he pressed on. He hauled, he sweated, he risked his own reputation on steel that looked ready to give up at any second. Was it loyalty to a friend teetering on the edge of failure? Or was it something else, the thrill of proving he could rip the impossible back from the jaws of death? The gamble was savage, old iron resurrecting older iron, each engine ticking like a time bomb set to humiliate them. When those 5 weathered beasts finally rolled onto Alan's lot, surrounded by the carcasses of 20 more, the air cracked with tension. Was this a resurrection, or just more bodies piled onto the funeral pyre of Alan's dream? The mission reeked of recklessness, a desperate attempt to stitch together a fantasy using rust, grit, and prayers whispered into diesel fumes. It wasn't planning. It wasn't business. It was survival dressed up as salvation. And when the dust finally settled, Heavy D broke the silence with talk of the Kodiak giveaway, as though none of it mattered. But everyone could feel the weight pressing down. This wasn't just about Alan. It was a reminder. Even kings of diesel can drown when they dive headfirst into someone else's chaos. Yet it was only the beginning. A bigger, darker battlefield waited. Rick's rusty kingdom. The Nevada sun scorched a wasteland of steel bones and fading glory. Rows of army planes rusted into the sand, forgotten trucks leaned like gravestones, and steel skeletons sprawled like casualties of wars that time itself had erased. This was Rick Clemens' kingdom, a museum built from muscle, metal, and memory. Decades of collecting, preserving, worshipping machines now crumbled beneath the weight of age and money, forcing Rick to sell off pieces of his soul one bolt at a time. Into this graveyard roared Heavy D, leading 3 semis, Low buoys stretched to the horizon, 200 feet of hauling muscle screaming against the desert. The mission. Rip history from the dirt and drag it screaming back to life. Hemmets, bridge boats, broken planes, and monsters like the C-46 Frog helicopter and the Cobra gunship. But this wasn't just a haul. Every relic they touched carried heartbreak. Every wing, every tank tread, every rotor was a fragment of Rick's life's work, now handed over to strangers with grease-stained hands. Viewers could feel the grief bleeding through the screen, the sting of a man watching his legacy be carved apart. And there, standing in the wreckage, was Heavy D, eyes burning with schemes. He didn't see junk. He saw possibilities. Old planes gutted into tiny homes? Diesel-charged chateaus lined up like some scrapyard suburbia? Was it madness? Was it genius? No one could tell. Then the desert trembled. From the sand rose the monster, an 48 Malawian Quachas recovery truck, Hemmet frame forged for war, a Detroit engine coiled with untamed power. It wasn't just a truck, it was a mechanical warhorse, barely broken in with only 22 miles on its heart. A crane capable of tearing steel from the earth. A 60,000-pound winch that could drag ghosts back into the land of the living. Heavy D climbed into the beast like a knight grasping Excalibur, turned the key, and the engine roared like thunder rolling through the graveyard. His grin said it all. He hadn't just bought a truck, he had claimed a weapon, a throne, a crown of steel. "She's coming home," he declared. And with that, the battlefield shifted once more, the empire of Diesel bleeding forward into its next brutal chapter. But victory came with risk. To load the beast, they had to attempt the unthinkable, using one trailer as a ramp to drag this iron giant onto another. It was clever. It was madness. It was a gamble that could shatter steel and bone in one wrong move. The desert held its breath. They spotted it like a prize in the wild, an imposing Mark V bridge-building boat. This wasn't just another vessel rusting away in some forgotten yard. It had muscle, twin-sty boat engines and roaring jet pumps, the kind of power you rarely see outside a military catalog. Heavy D's eyes lit up instantly. Rare. Fierce. Practically begging to be hauled away. And the best part? It slid onto their raw max trailer like destiny had planned it. Heavy D cracked a grin, joking that every new boat meant one of the old ones had to go. Was it sharp business strategy, or was it simply his curse, never being able to walk away from a machine that whispered adventure? Every time they stepped into Rick's yard, the air carried the weight of history. Twisted steel and weathered wings weren't just junk. They were fragments of stories, echoes of wars, ghosts of pilots and sailors. To claim one meant stripping Rick of something he had kept alive. That tension always hung in the background, twisting like a knife. Were they saviors of relics, or scavengers with too little space and too much ambition? Still, by the end of that raid, 2 trailers groaned under the weight of a monstrous wrecker and that rare boat. They were grinning like kids at Christmas, but behind the excitement lay Rick's quiet sacrifice. And then came the real storm, the machines of the sky. Airplanes, helicopters, dreams with wings. That was where the choices got brutal. The crown jewel of the chaos was a hulking C-46 Knight, better known as the Frog. Heavy D's heart nearly punched out of his chest when he saw it. "I just bought a baby Chinook," he bellowed. The twin rotors cut the sky like fangs, a marine workhorse once flown by the elite HMM 774 Squadron. Soldiers, rescues, combat, it had carried them all. This wasn't just a machine, it was a warlord disguised in steel. But excitement collided with reality. Heavy D didn't own it outright. Not really. The truth spilled out later. He and Rick had gone in as partners. Bringing the Frog back to life wasn't just expensive, it was an Everest of mechanical resurrection. Too much for one man. Together, they gambled on the dream, 2 gearheads clutching at history's throat, daring it to fly again. The rest of Rick's arsenal was no less dramatic. An one Cobra, lean and venomous, still clung to Rick's soul. Even with prosthetic legs, he refused to let it go. He swore he'd fly it again. Stubborn, maybe. But for him, it wasn't metal. It was memory. Nearby, OV, 10 Broncos were sold off, bound for secret skies. A Hughes helicopter waited for a buyer, an F-86 jet sat like a sleeping beast demanding endless repairs, and Rick's beloved 06, his baby, sat gutted as he hunted parts to make it roar once more. Grumman albatross planes scattered the field, one abandoned like a forgotten orphan, another barely kept alive. Even the S-2 tracker, built to stock submarines, sat grounded by a ruined engine. Each piece was a battlefield in itself. For Rick, letting go was agony. For Heavy D, it was adrenaline. And at the center of it all, the frog stood like a promise, capable of carrying 4,000 pounds in its belly, or 10,000 pounds dangling beneath, ready to rip skyward with soldiers, cargo, or raw history. 2 rotors meant no tail to weigh it down, no limits to its command. A beast built for war, now waiting to see if these men could tame it, or if it would bury them in its past. It wasn't just a helicopter. It was a beast of steel and rotor blades, a relic of war reborn. The frog could rip through the sky at 160, even 170 miles per hour, faster than the Black Hawk that Heavy D already flew. But inside, there was no comfort, no polish. It was stripped bare, metal ribs, wires like veins, and seats meant for soldiers, not passengers. Brutal, functional, unforgiving. Heavy D claimed he wanted to honor its past, to save history. But the truth was grittier. He wanted this monster alive again, fighting fires, rescuing the stranded, carving purpose out of rust and memory. Yet the path was treacherous. Unlike the Black Hawk, making a frog legal for civilian use was a bureaucratic nightmare. It demanded specialized mechanics, endless paperwork, and rules that twisted tighter with every step. Heavy D even made a public call for help, admitting he didn't have all the answers. That alone told the story. This was less a restoration and more a war against red tape, money pits, and doubt. Meanwhile, the frog sat there like a silent challenge, hulking, immovable, equal parts burden and hope. Rick was already selling off his life's collection, swallowing defeat with dignity. Heavy D, on the other hand, was gambling everything on a project that looked more like a ticking time bomb than a dream machine. And just as that colossal battle raged, another unfolded in the snow, smaller, but no less brutal. The DTV Shredder. A toy, a flop, or the future? It was an electric off-road predator, 250 pounds of fury, able to hit 30 miles per hour on twin motors powered by 4 batteries. Heavy D set his mission: drag a sled loaded with 200 pounds of supplies up to his mountain cabin. Simple on paper, hell in practice. The hitch snapped almost instantly, shattering their first test before it even began. Deep snow swallowed the machine, forcing the throttle wide open, draining the batteries at terrifying speed. Heavy D wrestled the shredder like it was a wild bull, his weight and size working against him as the machine bucked and fought to throw him off. Dave, lighter and nimbler, seemed to glide, proving this wasn't a machine for everyone. It was unforgiving, selective, built to expose weakness. Technology was supposed to give them an edge. They tracked their trail with Onyx off-road, but the map couldn't stop the failures stacking up. Hans pushed his shredder downhill, only to snap the throttle clean off, leaving jagged plastic in his hands and zero control. The ride devolved into chaos, frustration bleeding into laughter, as the future of off-road sputtered in the snow like a half-baked experiment. In the end, it wasn't about sleek rides or heroic machines. It was about battles. Massive ones in the air with an ancient warbird, and smaller, biting ones in the snow with a futuristic toy. Heavy D was caught between history's ghosts and tomorrow's promises, fighting to conquer both. The frog and the shredder stood as symbols, one of overwhelming risk, the other of fragile innovation. And Heavy D, somewhere in the middle, was left to decide which wars were worth winning. Heavy D wasn't about to quit. When the shredder's power started fading, he ripped the battery out of Hans's machine and jammed it into his own. It was a bold, scrappy move that bought him more time, but only just. The ride had already turned into a battlefield of wipeouts, slick turns, and near disasters. Heavy D wrestled with the machine like it was a wild animal. The brakes bit too hard, the steering twitched at the slightest touch, and the deeper the snow got, the more out of control he felt. At one point, the mighty Heavy D was buried nose first in the snow, flailing while Dave carved past him without breaking stride. The sight wasn't just humbling, it was brutal. They pushed forward mile after punishing mile, but the shredder finally gave up after about 11. What should have been a thrilling sprint turned into a grueling 2-hour crawl, littered with breakdowns and stops. Dragging the sled across bare dirt at the hill's base sucked the battery dry like a leech, killing the ride for good. Heavy D's verdict? A lukewarm 7 out of 10. He admitted the machine gripped well enough on firm ground, but in deep snow it was a nightmare, unpredictable, wild, and nearly impossible to master. He didn't mince words. The throttle system needed a complete overhaul if the shredder was ever going to be user-friendly. The makers nodded, open to his hard-earned feedback, but the cracks had already shown. What was supposed to be a high-octane thrill ride quickly unraveled into something far heavier, a sobering reminder that shiny new tech rarely comes without bruises. The hype promised power, speed, and adrenaline. The reality was broken parts, drained batteries, and endless wipeouts. This wasn't just a ride gone wrong, it was a harsh reality check, a collision between dreams and the uncompromising laws of physics. Excitement alone, no matter how electric, cannot power innovation. And yet, in the middle of all the chaos, one thing stood unshaken: Heavy D's refusal to quit. He stumbled, he sank, he fought the snow, and he clawed his way forward. The shredder may have failed, but the man at its helm never did. The true spectacle wasn't the machine, it was the grit of the rider who wrestled it to the bitter end. So here's the real question. Is Heavy D just a dreamer, a man always biting off more than he can chew, destined to drown in his own ambition? Or is every setback forging him into steel, shaping him into someone tougher, sharper, and more relentless with every failure? You decide. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and tell us what you think, because what we're watching might not just be a string of wild experiments. It might be the forging of a diesel empire in fire, or it could be the slow-motion collapse of everything Heavy D has built. And that's the heart of this story. It wasn't about a machine running out of juice in the snow. It was about the spirit of refusing to be broken, even when everything around you says it's over. It was about grit in the face of humiliation, about failure turned into fuel, about the raw, unfiltered chaos that keeps fans glued to the screen. Heavy D has become more than a builder or a rider. He's become a symbol of the struggle itself. Every busted battery, every wipeout, every moment he gets buried in the snow is another scar that tells the story of a man too stubborn to give up. That's why people keep coming back. Not for perfection, not for polished wins, but for the fight. For the chaos, the unpredictability, the drama that makes every episode feel like a battle between man, machine, and the impossible. This isn't just about trucks anymore. It's about daring to push the limits, even when the odds laugh in your face. It's about falling, failing, and still climbing back on for one more round. And if you felt the adrenaline, the suspense, and the sting of those lessons right here with us, then don't go anywhere. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and lock yourself in, because the ride ahead is only going to get wilder. The road is dangerous, unpredictable, and brutal, but Heavy D isn't slowing down, and neither should you. The next chapter promises more chaos, more fire, and more jaw-dropping moments. This empire is being built in the ashes of failure, and you don't want to miss a single second of what comes next. Because in the end, that's what makes Heavy D's story so magnetic. The unpredictability, the spectacle, the constant edge-of-your-seat uncertainty that transforms even a failed ride into something unforgettable. Think about it. Most people would have packed it in after the first battery swap, chalked it up as a bad day, and gone home with excuses. But not Heavy D. He treats every failure like a sparring partner, every breakdown like a new battlefield. When the throttle snapped back too fast, he didn't quit. He wrestled it like a bull rider clinging to a beast. When the snow swallowed his machine and spit him out headfirst, he didn't sulk. He clawed his way out and kept charging forward. And when the battery finally died after miles of punishing terrain, he didn't see defeat. He saw proof, raw evidence that innovation takes pain before it gives glory. That's why people don't just watch him. They root for him. Because Heavy D embodies that relentless, reckless drive that dares to test limits most of us only dream about. And sure, the shredder cracked, the ride faltered, and the snow made him look human in the most brutal way, but that humanity is what keeps fans glued to the saga. It's not about whether the machine worked, it's about whether the man behind it had the courage to keep going. And courage, real courage, is messy. It bleeds, it stumbles, it faceplants in front of an audience of millions, and still drags itself back into the fight. That's what makes him different. Heavy D's empire isn't built on shiny, perfect wins. It's hammered together from mistakes, forged in failure, and welded by pure willpower. Every project is a gamble, every experiment a risk, and every episode a reminder that progress doesn't come clean, it comes through chaos. And if you've ever tried to chase a dream, you know exactly what that feels like. That's why this ride matters. Because it wasn't about snow, or batteries, or a faulty throttle. It was about showing the world that falling doesn't mean you're finished, it means you're in the game. And if you felt that fire, if you saw yourself in the struggle, then you're already part of this journey. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and strap in, because this isn't just entertainment. It's a front-row ticket to watching a man and his empire fight, fail, and rise again, one wild ride at a time. The story doesn't end with a dead battery in the snow. No, the story is only just getting started.